let me kind of take a pulse on who's in the room. Anyone founded a company? Anyone aspiring to found a company? Anyone receive funding? Anyone looking for funding? Oh yeah, everyone's got the hands up on that. Well, what I thought I would do, and when I had talked to the guys today about what to talk about, I said, you know, you get a keynote and they yap, and then you don't have enough time for questions. So rather than me just kind of coming up with some topic and babbling my head off, I'd rather just take your questions. But quick, first background. So I am an angel investor. Back in 2011, I co-founded with Veronica Sonsev and Deborah Jackson Women Innovate Mobile, which is a startup accelerator. We operate in the manner of Techstars or Y Combinator, if you're familiar with that, those, ERA, Dream Adventures, that model of early stage investing. And we looked at the market and we said, what really helps seed stage, or companies at the seed stage, promising startups, what helps them the most? And it's that bundle of resources, which includes some money, but most importantly, includes the introductions and being brought into networks of influence. And we looked and we liked that model, but what we didn't see was a lot of people who looked like us. And rather than writing an editorial or doing a white paper to say, why aren't there women? We looked at the other investors at that level and we said, thank you. You're overlooking and you're undervaluing these companies, and we'll take them. We will invest in those. As an aside, sort of interesting running a first accelerator program, there's not a lot of people who look like anyone in this room in accelerators. You're either too old, right? Your skin color's not the right, sorry, to put that out there, and your gender's wrong, right? There's a bias and there's some profiling of investors with respect to youth, with respect to a certain gender. I also believe with a certain socioeconomic and demographic. That creates challenges, but that creates opportunities, and it creates opportunities for different people. So we launched this, and we also focused, and it sounds so funny now, we focused on mobile, but if you look back in 2011, PC and mobile sales were at the same place. And it is amazing to look at it now, and there was a stat looked at this week that 78% of the Chinese population is accessing the internet, or the internet portion of the Chinese population, 78% of it is accessing the internet through mobile. And 71% of that population is between 18 and 35. So fundamentally, our behaviors and everything has changed, and what this creates in terms of opportunities. For me personally, those opportunities, my challenge to all of you, if you're thinking, I'm starting a company, I'm going to launch an idea, and I want to hear about those, and I want to take your questions on funding and accelerators and all that kind of thing. But I would challenge you to think bigger, and think of our bigger problems that we need to have solved. New York City announced this week that it's going to be the largest free Wi-Fi zone, 95 blocks up in Harlem, which is fantastic. Bloomberg's going out with a bang. New York City also has the largest number of children living in homeless shelters since the Great Depression. Balance those things out. The promise of technology is leaving a lot of people behind. And how can you, as mobile developers, do more and bring more people into networks, bring other people who are outside of those influence, bring them up, so that this promise of technology and this promise of mobile technology, which is reduce barriers to entry, how can we expand that to more people? And yes, at the same time, make money. So, I've had my soapbox. I'd rather take your questions on funding and seed funding and what angel investors look at, accelerator programs, all that kind of stuff. So, bring it on. Bring on the questions. Oh, come on, you're not that. Oh, yeah, Alexis, I knew you were going to do this.
I have to start it off.
So say who you are, because you know my pet peeve. This is the greatest networking opportunity. You have everyone listening to you.
So my name is Alexis Finch. I'm a ringer here because I'm actually one of the mentors with Women Innovate Mobile. I'm a UX researcher, strategist, and designer, or a defenestration expert, as I prefer to call myself, and I'm now part of Team Seed and Spark, closing the loop between crowdfunding and distribution for independent film. My question, since we are right now going through our fundraising, is how important is it to actually go through all the seed runs when you're essentially handing off huge chunks of your company? One of my favorite stories is the story of Spanx, and she owns 100% of her company because she never did get investment. So challenges of the adversity of fundraising for a woman wound up being the benefit of having all of her stuff as hers. So how do you explain that to someone who's coming to you and saying like, well, you know, should I fundraise or shouldn't I?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you did ask it. So I would say to anyone, my first thought is, do you need funding? The worst thing I want to say, I hear as an angel investor or as an accelerator, is someone's like, I have this idea, but unless someone funds it, it's like, find a way to get your idea off the ground. Figure out what the business model is, and is it something that is fundable? Not everything is fundable. Between, what is it, 2 and 4% of any startups that pitch VCs get funded, and that's about the same for angel investing. So it is rare to get funded, regardless of your idea, regardless of your gender, regardless of anything else. It is also important to remember that getting funding is like getting a mortgage on your house, right? It's someone else who owns this now. So take a step back, and do you want to give up control? Do you want to give up ownership, right? This is not like, oh great, I made money, I got funding. It's like, no, you get to deal with me now. And if I'm an angel, you're dealing with me as an angel investor, it's coming out of my pocket. This is not some LPs I'm having to answer to. This is my money. And if it's dealing with VCs, and they've got LPs, you know, we got a 7-year timeline. Let's go. How are you going to make me a return? So it may not be your company anymore, and it may not be your vision that's executed anymore. And you have to think about that before you take money. And is there different ways to take money? And is there different ways to do things? Can you get to revenue? Right? In this day and age now, too, it's even harder to get funding because people want to see money. Where's the revenue stream? Best thing you can do is get to making revenue faster. Are there other sources that you can go to? Can you do crowdfunding? Are there contests? Are there competitions? You know, there's a lot of accelerators out there. Some of them take equity. Some of them, guess what? They don't. Free money, woohoo, take it. Right? But first and foremost, think, why do you need to take money? And saying that you need your idea funded by somebody else, I can't get this off the ground if somebody else, you know what? Take a second job. Just keep your job that you have, put everything into funding your startup. It's just what you've got to do. But for me, at the end of the day, you know, and Sarah Blakely is a brilliant example in terms of this. I mean, she owns her company. And that, to me, is like the pinnacle that we should be working towards. You know, owing a lot of debt to somebody else, you know, if you're entrepreneurs, owning your own company, but if you're saying, I have to take money, make sure you really are creating something big. More questions. You can't just let the ringer give you questions.
Hi, so I'm Pauline Weger, and I founded a company called Quotable. And we're taking the most shared content that's out there, which is quotes, and we're using it as an entree to tell stories of women and girls in a whole new modern way. So my question for you is, we've got a concept, we've got a development team. I really come at it more from the business and content creation side, because that's really my background. What I think we need is to get to literally thousands and thousands of users, and that's the expertise that I need. And so it's feeling like, how do you do this? You know, I feel like I'll need to give up part of my company to get that access so that we can take something and get it pervasive. Any thoughts on the best approach to doing something like that?
Well, you've hit on the point. You know, first of all, this is great to meet you since we've emailed and all the rest of it. Content sites are hard. They're really hard. And in terms of what you're saying is, I'm going to have to give up piece of this, and you're thinking I have to give up piece of this because I'm going to need to take investment, you're sort of in a chicken and an egg situation. Until there's lots of users and there's traction, no one's going to fund it. You know, unless you could find maybe an angel investor who's very passionate, particularly if you have a mission with respect to women and girls. But, you know, people are investing. They're looking for a return. And they're looking for a big return. And I'd probably say the best advice I would give you is start finding ways to get users. And in terms of giving up equity, maybe it's finding someone who has, with another site, with somebody else, has created that kind of viral acquisition, who has done something that has created a huge user base, and, you know, give up by finding someone who's got that skill set, is passionate about what you're doing, and give them equity to come and do it for you. But it's a kind of a chicken and egg. You may think, oh, I need money because I need to go and get more users, but until the investors see the users, they may say, hey, yeah, we're interested, but come back to us when you hit these metrics. And those metrics keep getting pushed higher because there is so much going out there. People are downloading apps, but how often are they using them? You know, what are the things we tried once, and are we going to go back to it? Right? Content is hard. Content sites are really, really hard. And think about if you're going to take investment, what's your business model? Like, got to show people where the money is. You know, it's so funny, I mentored for an accelerator out in Omaha, and two of the guys who sat down, father and son development team, and it's a good thing about getting out of New York and Silicon Valley. You know, you actually see entrepreneurs who, you know, have dirt under their nails and gray hair. And they said, yeah, I'm going to tell you about this technology we're developing. I'm like, great, tell me. And it's facial recognition for like deer. This is for hunters. This is for people who are hunters, and they want to, you know, track a particular buck, or maybe you're a conservation area and you want to track the animals, whatever. And he explains this, and he goes through it to me, and I said to him, I'm going to tell you something that you probably weren't expecting to hear from a woman from New York who's also Canadian. And excuse my language. I looked at him, I said, I fucking love your technology. And he looked at me and goes, why? I said, because I can see the revenue. Right? Number one, top sales and growing sales in Cabela. If you're familiar with Cabela's catalog, big outdoorsman catalog, number one selling item that they have for hunters is trail cams. And this technology works in those trail cams. I'm like, I can see revenue. I love what you're doing. I'm never going to use it, but that doesn't matter. So this is, you know, you got to show investors revenue. They've got to be able to see the revenue at this point.
Follow up.
Yeah.
The native advertising, because again, that's where I'm coming from, is the companies that are paying tens of thousands of dollars to be really part of the content experience as opposed to advertising. Have you seen that work as a model?
Well, again, it comes back to the number of users. Until you have tons of users, it's like there's your chicken and egg, right? So you have to have so many users that someone could say, hey, the native advertising, all that kind of stuff is going to pay off. So until you have the users, until they can see the eyeballs, you know? So, I mean, in something like that pure kind of, when I say advertising play, you got to have just tremendous numbers of users. Otherwise, you know, like I said, where's the return? You had a question. We have one there, and we've got one back up there.
Elizabeth Vandenberg, my organization actually writes the white papers and writes the editorials, the National Center for Women in IT. So I'd like to ask you a couple of things really quick. The first one is I have a group, we started in 2007, we had 35 girls in a national recognition program, and now in 2013 we're about to do 200. Okay, so we built our base from 35, and this we call it a tech sorority. So I interact on a daily basis with 1,200 girls that are either in high school or college. So, as corny as it sounds, like what are the three things I should, make sure that we're saying to these young girls?
And so these are all girls in STEM?
Yeah, specifically computer science.
Yeah. You're doing tremendous work. Just in case people don't know, the hemorrhage rate for women out of STEM, even in college, if they get into college, is about 80%. And put gender aside, the United States is not going to be able to fulfill more than about 20% of its tech openings by 2020. We have a crisis. Especially for women, but just frankly, all of you going, hey, I've got my startup and I need a developer. We have a crisis. We have a crisis in education with respect to STEM, and we have a crisis, people going into it, pursuing technology and the hemorrhaging out, and the hemorrhaging with respect to women and minorities. It's just, when you're talking about who your users are going to be, they're going to be women or they're going to be minorities. I mean, come on, you got to have those people developing the technology. I think it's vitally important that they see role models and not role models that are remote. It can't be someone who is 30 or 40 or 50 years out. They need to see themselves in 5 years. They need to see themselves in 10 years. So the more you can highlight success stories, someone who is in your community and network, who's graduated and landed that job with Google or Twitter or whatever, show them those role models, show them someone who looks like them, and tell those stories so that they can see how they can achieve it. Think about and ensure that you're not just highlighting people who went to, we were talking earlier, Glenette is speaking at the end of the day, we were speaking earlier, so that it's not just people who went to MIT or Stanford, someone who, maybe graduated from high school, did a program and got a job, right? Show them the different paths and highlight those different career paths to get there so they don't feel that not only is it something that a certain socioeconomic does, but there's only one path. You have to go to MIT or Stanford, and whether or not you can afford to do that. But I think the more you can have role models and show and tell them those stories and celebrate the success of people within the network, I think that's really, really vital. There's probably a couple other things I can think of, so let's just make sure we exchange cards and do that. But that's just, it's so important. It's just vitally important that we keep anyone who is interested in STEM in STEM. And then, as I like to say, as the investor, I need them to stay there. I'm not going to have anything to invest in if they're not creating technology and coming through that pipeline.
Yeah, we really believe in, we have the advocate side, which I am, but we want you to stay to role model. It's so important for that.
It's vital. And and we sort of say that, developers in the room who, are attending hackathons and those kind of activities. When you see someone who doesn't necessarily look like you at those events, make sure they feel welcome. One of the women who I mentor is a 13-year-old self-taught coder out in California, and some of the stories, it's like, why are you here, little brown-skinned girl? It's like, why don't we celebrate the fact that she's there and that her father spends his every weekend taking her to these things because she can't get enough of it. Oh, and she's on the wrestling team, too. There's one wrestling team. It's mixed. She's the only girl. No, let me see. Where do we had here, and then we have there, and then we have here. Okay.
My name is Kathy Liu. I currently work for a public company as a UX designer, but I'm also working on my own startup business. So my question for you is related to funding. In terms of, I don't want to seek external funding. We have a little bit of saving, but I'm definitely on a budget. So based on your experience, what are some of the ways to actually start off your business on a budget when I probably will need a partner, and then find some way to compensate having a partner,
Yep.
and also I'll have a small technical team. So all those things, I definitely want to give people benefits and have the compensation that they deserve, but at the same time, I'm definitely on a budget. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is that, based on your experience, at what point of your startup, the money calculation just doesn't count well anymore, and then you really need to sort of like sit down and then really think about whether you're actually failing your initial idea and actually you need to kind of stop the bleeding. I kind of want to have a sense, from someone who has done this before and has that experience to give myself like a healthy kind of like health check on my own.
Right, right.
So that's kind of
Those are
parts of
the
questions. Yeah.
great questions. I mean, first of all, I was going to say, make sure you're creating something that people want, and not only something people want, people are going to pay for. So I had a conversation with a startup founder sitting, Sunday night at a holiday party, and I said, well, that sounds interesting. Have you talked to anyone about it? No, I'm just going to, no. You can't sit, the equivalent of sitting in a garage. You've got to go out there and do customer acquisition, potential customer interviews. Will they pay for this? Do they want it? Will they pay for it? And if they won't, then you say, you know what? I got to stop right now. Okay? Because you can overdevelop features, you can go and pursue some paths, spend a lot of money or little money, and then find you're creating something that no one wants, right? So make sure you're creating something that people not only want, but that they're going to pay for. Talk to people about what you're doing, because at this stage, what you've got to give away is equity, right? And talk to people, why I say that is talk to people what you're doing, because if you're creating something really interesting and someone else gets passionate about it, you could give them equity. They want to be part of your team. They want to see it built. And that's when you sign on and do things and do crazy terms. And Alexis is probably sitting there shaking her head going, yes, yes, yes. You sign on and you do things because you're really passionate about the technology that someone is building. And you accept and do things when, if it was something that you weren't passionate about, you'd keep a day job and look for standard benefits and all that kind of stuff. And if you're thinking this is going to be a big idea that ultimately needs funding, it's never too early to start talking to investors, right? Start cultivating those relationships and find out if it is ever something that someone would ever fund. We talk a lot about the Series A funding crunch, the sort of the difference between the startups that have received some angel or seed funding and the ones who are actually getting Series A and later funding. And there's a big difference, right? Guess what? Startups are testing an idea. You're throwing something against a wall. Do it as quickly, as cheaply as possible, because most of you, I hate to say it, should die. Right? That's the whole idea. Not every startup is going to be a company. Not every company is going to be a profitable business. So test it, see if it's going to work, move on. Maybe it becomes something else, right? We celebrate crazy stories like fab.com and all the rest of it, and guess what? Maybe that should have just died a long time ago before serious rounds of funding and money on the line that people keep kind of hitting the patient with life support, okay? So test things early, talk to people about your idea. They may want to come on board. What you've got to give away right now is some equity. And that's the best thing to think about. And find people who, have got the best thing you do, find some people who've got some stamina and resources like you do. I also think it's funny that so many investors look over, I'm going to say older, because I'm older entrepreneurs. You've got experience, you got some money in the bank, your needs are different. These are the people who can do a lot with a lot less money, so. Question?
So, sort of build on what you...
Oh, you got to tell us who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Marianne Seraph. I'm a creative director for a small design firm. But I've been working a little bit more in the mobile realm and finishing up my graduate degree in usability. So I've got some interest in focusing more on underserved communities, and particularly in healthcare arena, the older users. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to help society as a whole as well as individuals. And that sort of brings me saleability. It's about what you're saying, it's about proving to people you can make money. Well, oftentimes some of these ideas start with a kernel and morph into something else that's much more successful. And I think in my perspective, in a lot of ways, you've got to start, putting things out there and seeing what works and what engages.
Right.
When you're talking about like international communities, there's the international development arena, there are lots of opportunities there to engage users who are just now getting access to some of these products and things like that. How do you develop for these underserved populations without the immediate promise of profitability or is there a sort of a think tank where...
Well, how long is the market? Because there's the thing, hey, this underserved community is a small market. It may be a massive market. And a lot of it, I think we need to get out of our own heads in terms of what technology people are doing. One of the startups I have been an advisor to, they're using SMS technology. And you can go, why would anyone do that, right? Think of all the feature phones that are still in place in the world, right? Not all of us are wandering around with, the newest iPhone. Some of those underserved markets are the biggest markets out there. And part of that is, what are we creating for? And stop, talk to the people in this room, stop creating for the elite, right? What is it they really need? Mobile banking, mobile payments, just think if we could put, I don't know, check cashing, advanced check cashing companies, out of business, like, with the interest rates they charge, right? Just think for people who still use, like I said, much more of a feature phone than a smartphone, though. Given smartphone prices, that's likely to change as well. So look at the size of the market and in terms of what number that represents. And it may be that you've got a revenue model that is a user, like a per user, that is very low. But if the market is massive enough, then that's interesting. Yeah. And yes, in underserved markets, particularly outside of North America, I think those are particularly exciting. And still places where you could look at with Me Too technology, because they just don't have it. But healthcare is interesting in terms of depending on what you're thinking of doing. Some of the healthcare, in terms of the things that we really need, when I sort of kind of go back to my kind of social, thoughts in mind in terms of us as individuals and what technology can do in a meaningful way. A lot of that funding is drying up in terms of devices and other things. I'm going to say really important technology that should be funded. It's just taking a very long time and too long a timeline in terms of returns. And a lot of the early stage investors in that healthcare devices and others have really been squeezed out. So that's actually a really, really tough market. But you're seeing a lot of interest and activity. And I want to say it's sort of like the healthcare social networks. And I kind of do a cynical face, but a Facebook for healthcare, I just don't see where that truly changes things. As opposed to really, monitoring diabetes or doing other things where we can really make some transformative change. So, but yeah, look at the numbers of people versus, what those people are earning or what they're doing. Because chances are most of them do have some kind of a mobile device, and they, and some kind of a, mobile payment. They're not necessarily on, AT&T's, $70, you'll get this and give us all your data plan, but they likely have some kind of a mobile phone and are accessing the internet, or they're accessing information that way, and understanding how they're using it and designing around that. That's interesting. You had a question.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jian Wang, and I'm a mobile application developer Yes, my question maybe not related to funding, but it's more like I always had a dream saying, hey, later on I may want to join a startup and working as a technical kind of technical partner or something, all that. But I have some disadvantage. I have a special skin color. And
No, you're a mobile developer. You're like gold. You're the needle in the haystack. This is part of the reason that I get people to stand up and say who they are and what they do. Is sort of that, one of the things I'm often asked to speak on is networking and making those connections in communities and how you expand your network and all that kind of stuff. And asking a question in a Q&A period, you have the audience, everyone is listening to you, and that's why I made all of you do that today, because now you never know. Someone may say, I care about healthcare, I care about this, I can help you with this. You're a developer. You are like the thing everyone is looking for. You are the unicorn.
Thank you.
You just need to start putting it out there to people what your aspiration is in terms of working for a startup and coming in as a CTO.
Yeah, exactly. That's my goal. Here, I
How many people want his resume? How many jobs do you want by the end of this Q&A session?
I think I'm really good.
He's trying to sell himself more. You just had to say you were a mobile app developer, and it was like,
2% equity.
Thank you.
not enough.
Thank you. And I also have other different disadvantage. Maybe I'm not watching sports. I'm maybe not humorous. I'm not funny, but I'm technically good. So if that, what kind of advice would you give to me in order to build my career later on? I can join a startup so that the startup will be happy to accept me, to contribute there and grow with it. So what kind of thing would you suggest me? I cannot change my skin color, and I can watch more sports and being able to build more relationship, but I think in my strength is technical. So what kind of advice would you give to people like that? How can you be successful to achieve the dream?
I'm going to say keep doing what you're doing in terms of being a technical master and being a mobile app developer. Let people know what your aspiration is. Okay? You are going to have, in my humble opinion, the choice of working with any startup you would want to. Because I wasn't joking. You are a unicorn, right? People need you. The choice is yours on where you work. And for those of us, talking with Gladette and Alexis earlier, we need more developers like you. We need more developers who are not perpetuating an exclusionary culture, aka the programmers, right? We don't need that frat mentality anymore that it excludes not only women, excludes people who don't watch sports, right? Or don't drink, or whatever the case may be. So for me, like when I look at you, you're gonna have the choice of any startup you wanna work for. Figure out what you really care about. Like, programmers, as I say to the non-technical founders who are looking for you, they are always like, hey, I need someone to build on my time out. Developers are not plumbers. When you get a sink broken, you need someone to fix it, right? That's a plumbing job. If you're building a website, if you're building a technical product, you need someone who is passionate and excited, is an artist, is creative, Computer science is a language. We're not saying it's not, nuts and bolts, it's a language. So what are you passionate about? And make sure you're building a product that you're passionate about, because that's when your artistry is really going to come out. If you are the best mobile developer out there, everyone is going to want you, and they're going to throw stuff at you. So have absolute clarity on what you want, and tell people what you're looking for. Those opportunities are going to come, and be yourself. If you don't like sports, who cares, right? The world needs more developers who don't like sports or beer or warm beer or cold pizza or whatever else, you know, goes on in that world. So don't change. Keep being the fabulous developer you are. Just let people know what your aspirations are, and let people know what kinds of things, like you want to be in a startup, you want to be a CTO, what kinds of things do you want to work on? You know, is it going to excite you to work on healthcare? Is it going to excite you to work on, what are you working on?
Latest idea, a product, based on what you just said, a product that takes check cashing and delivers cash.
Exactly. So there we go. Maybe, you know, check cashing, payments. Maybe that's what interests you, because then you're going to build the most magnificent product out there. But don't change. Don't change.
Thank you.
Please don't change.
I'm glad that I got confirmation.
Don't change. I think you got confirmation from lots of people. All right.
All right, quick question. So like a lot of people here, a little bit older than 20. I'm a mid-career manager here at Gannett, and actually working on an internal startup program. We have an in-house incubator. So I just got about a second round of funding from the company to start on the startup. One of the reasons that was appealing to me, of course, is that I can keep my day job, and they give me company time to work on my startup. So we're in talks with IBM is developing our application. It's going to be great. They're going to give us some equity. But here's the concern that I have for a lot of people my age: getting ready to start a family, can't move out to California, can't go to New York every weekend, can't allow for that type of life disruption because my family is more important than any money that I would ever make. So for people like me, when I come to you as an angel investor and I say I have a day job and I'm going to probably keep it until I know this thing is going to work, but I want to work with you to see if we can get this idea off the ground, is that really acceptable? Or do they turn around and say, sorry, if you're not fully dedicated, we're not interested?
Depends. It depends. I mean, what I would say to you is, if you're thinking you're going to need outside funding, start having conversations now. Like, don't have conversations on funding when you need it. Start having it before, because it may be, that it's going to take longer, but someone realizes, right, this product is going to get built. It is going to get built on a different timeline. I am passionate about the technology in terms of who it's for and what's going to happen there, so that they may say, I'm prepared to have a longer timeline, right? But find out. But also, too, those conversations will tell you, all right, I've determined that my company and my technology needs outside funding. I'm hearing from all these people that if I just dedicated myself full-time to this, they would fund this.
It makes them happy.
You know what? Time to pull the trigger. Do I actually do this full-time? Like, where do I say I've got to give this a shot? There's a couple founders I know, and they've done a bunch of things, and I've looked at them and I said, you're not going to be happy till you execute on your own technology in your own company. Not saying that they will be successful, but I just know it's like that itch they have to scratch. So at some point you may say, I'm going to make this full-time, or you know what, I'm going to be kind of bootstrapping this for a significant amount of time, which may be okay. But if there's an opportunity and people say there's a real opportunity here, figure out what you can do. It's tough. It's tough.
Hi.
Hey, you. Tell everyone who you are.
I'm Gwinnett. My name is Gwinnett Park, and I'm a senior UX consultant for a government contractor.
And she's the 5 p.m.
And I'm speaking at 5 p.m. on UX. I wanted to go back to something that you talked about very early. You started off with talking about reaching back and giving back. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know as an entrepreneur, sometimes we just don't have the time to reach back. So do you have any thoughts about how we can do that and still make money, be profitable?
To reaching back, and when we were talking, you and I particularly talking earlier, sort of thinking about that. I mean, starting, honestly, when we launched the accelerator, it was interesting. A lot of entrepreneurs feel with an accelerator that it's the money, right? I'm going to get $40,000, or I'm going to get X amount of money. Accelerators, let me be honest with you, it's not the money. It's the networks and it's the relationships. And so when I talk about reaching back, it's pulling up other people into those networks of influence, right? So if we keep our networks closed and our relationships closed and don't bring other people in, then, it's like you're just perpetuating like little schools of fish, right? That don't expand and don't include other people. So what I always say, to people when they ask me, when I have a coffee with them or, can I be their mentor or whatever else? I said, only on the condition that you do this. You have to do this for somebody else, and you have to, kind of bring them in. Are you particularly concerned in terms of managing your time or?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. I'm one of these people, I'm all about multitasking. So where can you find opportunities to make the introductions and, perhaps stay within what your business and your personal, kind of technology startup passion is, and at the same time, mentor and do things for, other people. There's only 24 hours in the day and 7 days in the week, and if someone could come up with an app to expand the year or the hours in the day, that would be terrific. I would pay for that. I would pay a lot of money for that. But I think you just have to pick your battles, and you have to pick your opportunities, and you have to pick your choices of when you're going to mentor, and you got to pick your times when you just say, I just can't. Because if you can't give the time, if you're feeling too stretched and too exhausted, then it's not doing any good for that other person. For people who are experienced in the room, there's tons of co-working spaces and other accelerator programs. There's an amazing website. It's out of the UK. It's f6s.com. They list globally, I think it's about 1,900 accelerators, incubators, contests, competitions. So some of this, in terms of startups, like knowing that those things exist, but also for those of you who are thinking, I might want to work with a startup, or I do want to give back, find those opportunities, within your realm of expertise where you can give back, in this area that we have all sort of been drawing to and we all know and love, which is, entrepreneurship and startups, or perhaps it's with respect to women or girls or, minorities or whatever it may be, or maybe it's just with mobile. But that's like a great place to start. And a lot of times with accelerators, it's like concentrated pieces of time where you can devote and provide your expertise. Come in and teach a class, mentor one or two of the companies, and so you can make it as much or as little as you want. And like I said, you're not going out and volunteering and doing something in an area that may seem, too much. So you guys are going to miss lunch. And I know, and you've got Alexis Finch at 1:30, and you don't want to miss that. So I'm going to take one more question. I'm happy to go and hang out with anyone else here, but I don't want other people to miss lunch, because Alexis had her lunch before, and it looked quite good. So
quick comment for the mobile developer.
I want your resume. No, that's not the comment.
Yeah, right
No.
here. Ask you a question. So one of the most valuable things I've found working with in creating a mobile content platform is project management. So teaming up a developer with a great project manager is like hugely valuable.
Yep.
And then the question for you is, are there any mobile commerce sites by women that you recommend that we keep an eye on, that they've got this whole tap to buy down, and that they're really, doing some innovative thing in mobile commerce?
What?
So merchandise, actually products, and how you're buying them online.
Check out Plum Alley.
Plum Alley, yeah.
Yeah. So Deborah Jackson, one of my co-founders, is founder of Plum Alley, which is crowdsourcing as well as, say, e-commerce. But there's more and more. I'm going to say I end up with more in my inbox all the time in terms of sites which are specifically focused with respect to gender. And I laugh, for the guys in the room. I always think it's sort of funny when people talk about women as the minority. So I don't know how 51% of the population is the minority or a niche. Kind of odd to me. And just in case you're also wondering and thinking about your composition of your founding teams and who your ultimate audience or your customers, your buyers, who they are. Women control or influence 85% of all consumer as well as business purchases. And before you say to me, based on the things before, that's diapers and lipstick and all that, that's 91% of new home purchases. It's 41% of stock purchases, 65% of new car purchases. So if you're not taking the female gender into account and thinking about with your design and other things that you're creating women, frankly, you're leaving money on the table. And I was amused earlier, with the prior speaker and the little experiment they're going to do over Super Bowl. So 44% of NFL fans are women. And this is not suffering wives and girlfriends who are having to watch the game. This is because of Title IX. This is women who are rabid sports fans. So next time you're watching an NFL game and some of those commercials come on, just think how a rabid female sports fan feels about them and where her line of sight is going to be on when that, when those ads and things happen. But anyway, there's my gender piece on all of this. It's I say essential depending on what your market is and who you're selling to, and whether or not, because of your composition of your founding team, whether or not you're taking into account a huge market and missing it. All right, thank you for letting me do the keynote as a Q&A rather than just talking. Thank you for your questions. Don't miss lunch. I will stay and answer any other questions for the people who have got them, but enjoy the rest of the conference. Make sure you find Alexis at 1:30. Make sure you find Glenette at 5 o'clock. And I will also put a plug in for 5 o'clock tomorrow with Alyssa Shavinsky, founder of Glimpse. If you didn't look at VentureBeat, she's back, CEO of Glimpse, and that'll be a very interesting conversation because she has brought Pax back on as her CTO. So you can ask her about that as well. All right, thank you very much, and thank you for staying and asking your questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference.